A single dad stands helpless as his life is dumped onto the lawn. His little girl clutches a jar of handwritten wishes while neighbors whisper and watch. His voice shakes, he swears he paid the rent, but nobody believes him. Just when all hope is gone, a quiet stranger steps forward. She freezes the eviction with a single phone call, but whispers ripple through the crowd. She isn't just anyone. She's the landlord's hidden daughter, and a secret billionaire. What happens when her fight to save one broken family collides with her father's ruthless deal and a developer who wants the entire street wiped clean? Will compassion be enough to stop an entire neighborhood from being destroyed, or will saving them cost her everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Caleb Hart watched the movers dump another box onto his front lawn. His weathered hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice steady for Lily's sake. The 10-year-old clutched her treasured joy jar close to her chest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as she watched their life being scattered across the grass. "Please," Caleb said to the property management representative, a thin man in an ill-fitting suit who wouldn't meet his eyes. "I have the receipts right here." He pulled out a worn envelope from his back pocket, hands trembling slightly. "I've paid every month, on time." The rep barely glanced at the papers. "Our records show otherwise, Mr. Hart. The eviction notice was served weeks ago." "Which I contested." Caleb's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "I never got any late notices before that." A mover emerged from the house carrying a box that had split at the bottom. Books and papers spilled across the lawn, and among them a well-worn cookbook hit the ground with a soft thud. Lily let out a small cry. "That's Mommy's," she whispered, taking a step forward, but stopping when Caleb gently touched her shoulder. The neighbors had begun to gather, standing in loose clusters on the sidewalk. Caleb could hear their whispers, see the phones held up to record the scene. His face burned with shame, but he stood straight-backed, trying to shield Lily from their stares. "Someone should do something," a voice muttered from the crowd. As if in answer, Mrs. Alma Rios came charging across the lawn, her silver hair gleaming in the sun. She carried 2 folding chairs and had a cooler tucked under one arm. "Caleb Hart, you sit down right this minute," she commanded, setting up the chairs with practiced efficiency. "Lily, honey, come help me with this lemonade." Caleb started to protest, but Alma fixed him with a look that brooked no argument. "The Lord helps those who help themselves, but He also expects us to help each other. Now, sit." Lily wiped her eyes and helped Alma set up a small card table, carefully placing her joy jar in the center. The glass container caught the sunlight, the small pieces of paper inside visible, each one a blessing or good deed Lily had recorded. More neighbors drifted closer, drawn by Alma's presence. She handed out paper cups of lemonade, turning what had been a spectacle into something almost like a gathering. The sheriff's deputy shifted uncomfortably, checking his watch. "Ma'am, this doesn't change the eviction order." "Then you best do your job properly and check those payment records again," Alma replied firmly, passing him a cup of lemonade. "Because I've known Caleb Hart for years, and that man pays his bills." Caleb sat rigid in the folding chair, his pride warring with gratitude for Alma's intervention. He watched as another box of his belongings landed on the lawn, this one containing Lily's school awards and art projects. "Daddy," Lily whispered, pressing close to his side. "Remember what you always say? God doesn't give us more than we can handle?" Caleb wrapped an arm around her shoulders, wishing he felt as certain as he tried to sound when he repeated those words to her. The truth was, he'd been handling more than he could manage ever since Sarah died, trying to be both mother and father while working every odd job he could find. The property rep cleared his throat. "If you can't produce proof of payment right now, we have to proceed." "I have proof," Caleb insisted, holding out the envelope again. "Just look at the—" "Stop." The single word, spoken quietly but with unmistakable authority, cut through the murmuring crowd. A woman stepped forward. someone Caleb had seen around the neighborhood but didn't know well. She wore simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "I'm Grace Delaney," she said, addressing the sheriff's deputy directly. "And this eviction needs to halt immediately." The property rep scoffed. "Ma'am, you have no authority." "Actually, I do." Grace pulled out her phone, quickly typing something before turning it to show the deputy. "I'm Walter Delaney's daughter, and these properties are part of our family's holdings. There's been a serious error here." The deputy studied the screen, his eyebrows rising. He stepped aside to make a quiet phone call while the property rep spluttered protests. Grace turned to Caleb, her expression apologetic. "Mr. Hart, I've been reviewing the payment records. There was a system error at the management company. Several tenants' payments were misapplied. I have the documentation here." She held up her phone again. "Your rent was paid, all of it." Caleb stood slowly, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "You're saying, I'm saying this eviction is invalid," Grace stated firmly. She turned back to the deputy. "I'm prepared to verify my identity and authority, and I'm also prepared to discuss the management company's pattern of mishandling tenant payments, if necessary." The property rep had gone pale. The deputy ended his call and nodded to Grace. "Ms. Delaney's credentials check out. This eviction is suspended pending review." A small cheer went up from the gathered neighbors. Lily hugged her joy jar tight, a smile breaking through her tears. "Everything goes back inside," Grace instructed the movers. "Carefully, please." She pulled out her wallet and handed them each some cash. "I appreciate your help with this correction." The property rep began to edge away, but Grace's voice stopped him. "We'll need to discuss those misapplied payments, all of them. My office will be in touch." As the movers began carrying boxes back into the house, Alma pressed a fresh cup of lemonade into Grace's hands. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said with a knowing smile. Grace stepped away from the group, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, this is Grace Delaney. I need to speak with Mary at the county clerk's office." She paced a small circle on the lawn, her free hand gesturing as she talked. "Mary? Hi, it's Grace. I need your help with an urgent situation." Caleb watched her with cautious hope while helping Lily gather scattered papers from the grass. The afternoon heat had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the lawn where their belongings still lay scattered. "I'm looking at the payment records right now," Grace continued, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed atmosphere. "Yes, exactly. Can you pull up the property tax records for 1242 Maple Street?" She nodded, typing something into her phone. "That matches what I'm seeing. The payments were misapplied to account 4,471 instead of 4,477. Mrs. Alma supervised the movers as they carefully carried boxes back inside, calling out directions like a gentle drill sergeant. "That goes in the living room, boys. Mind the doorframe with that dresser." Grace's voice grew more animated. "Perfect, Mary. Could you email that confirmation right now?" "Yes, I'll hold." She turned to the property representative, who had been trying to slip away unnoticed. "Sir, you'll want to stay for this." A soft chime sounded from her phone. "Thank you, Mary. Got it." Grace pulled up the email and showed it to the sheriff's deputy. "Here's the county's official record of payment allocation. As you can see, the funds were misapplied due to a single-digit error in the account number." The deputy reviewed the documentation and nodded. "That appears to be in order, Ms. Delaney." Grace opened her banking app and made a few quick taps. "I'm transferring the corrected balance now, plus an additional month in advance to prevent any further issues." She showed the confirmation screen to both the deputy and the property representative. "The funds are available immediately." "Ms. Delaney," the property representative stammered, "this is highly irregular. What's irregular is evicting a tenant who paid their rent," Grace cut in firmly. "I suggest you return to your office and review all recent eviction proceedings for similar errors." Her tone left no room for argument. The gathered neighbors had grown quiet, but their whispers started up again as the property representative hurried away. "Did she say Delaney?" someone murmured. "Walter Delaney's daughter? I thought he didn't have any family. The billionaire's kid?" Caleb straightened up from where he'd been collecting Lily's artwork, his expression guarded. Grace turned to face him, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, his weathered face showing the strain of recent years, her eyes kind but careful. "Mr. Hart," Grace said softly, "I owe you an apology. This should never have happened." "You don't owe me anything," Caleb replied, his voice rough. "But thank you for stepping in." Lily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we put Mommy's cookbook back in the kitchen now?" The tension in Caleb's shoulders eased slightly as he looked down at his daughter. "Sure can, sunshine. Why don't you let Mrs. Alma help you find a safe spot for it?" As Lily scampered off with Alma, Grace surveyed the scene, boxes half unpacked, neighbors still lingering, the late afternoon sun warming everything in a golden glow. She seemed to come to a decision. "What we need," she announced, raising her voice slightly so everyone could hear, "is a proper neighborhood potluck, right here, right now. Help get everything back in order and share a meal together." Alma emerged from the house, beaming. "Now that's what I call divine inspiration. I've got 3 casseroles in my freezer, just waiting for an occasion." The suggestion sparked immediate action. Neighbors who had been watching from a distance began stepping forward. "I can bring my famous potato salad," called Mrs. Chin, from 2 doors down. "Give me 20 minutes to whip up some cornbread, Mr. Washington offered. "I've got folding tables in my garage," added another neighbor. Grace turned back to Caleb, who looked overwhelmed by the sudden flood of offers. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. "I should have checked with you first." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, watching as Lily excitedly showed Mrs. Alma where different boxes belonged. His pride warred visibly with practicality before he finally nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it's okay. But I need to contribute something too." "The venue," Grace suggested with a small smile, "and maybe your company?" For the first time that day, Caleb's face relaxed into something close to a smile. "I think I can manage that." The next hour transformed the scene of crisis into one of community. Neighbors streamed back and forth with dishes and supplies. The movers, paid extra by Grace to stay and help, worked alongside residents to carry furniture and boxes back inside. Someone brought a portable radio, and gentle music mixed with the sounds of conversation and laughter. Lily appointed herself official coordinator of the Joy Jar table, carefully setting out paper and pens. "Everyone has to write down something good," she instructed solemnly. "That's how we remember the happy things, even on hard days." Grace watched the girl's determined expression, so much wisdom in such a young face. She picked up a pen and wrote her own note, "Neighbors helping neighbors." As she dropped it in the jar, she caught Caleb watching her. "Your father," he said carefully. "I didn't know." "No one does, usually," Grace replied. "We're not close. Haven't been for years." She smoothed down her simple t-shirt. "I prefer to live quietly, do what good I can without fanfare." Before Caleb could respond, Alma's voice rang out across the lawn. "Food's up! Everyone come get it while it's hot!" The impromptu buffet line stretched down the driveway, casseroles, salads, fresh bread, and desserts seemingly materializing out of nowhere. Paper plates and plastic forks were passed hand to hand. Children darted between adults' legs, dogs on leashes waited hopefully for dropped morsels, and the earlier tension dissolved into the warm evening air. Caleb found himself seated between Lily and Grace at one of the folding tables, a plate piled high with various neighbors' specialties in front of him. His daughter chatted animatedly with everyone within earshot, her earlier tears forgotten as she proudly showed off her growing collection of Joy Jar notes. "Sometimes," Grace said softly, watching the scene around them, "it takes a hard moment to remind us we're not alone." Caleb nodded slowly, his guard still up but softened by the genuine warmth surrounding them. "Yeah," he agreed. "Though I wish it hadn't taken all this to bring folks together." "Then maybe," Grace suggested, "we should make sure it's not the last time." The evening sun cast long shadows across Caleb's front lawn as neighbors gathered around folding tables laden with home-cooked dishes. The scent of Alma's famous chicken casserole mingled with fresh cornbread and countless other comfort foods. What had started as a day of humiliation had transformed into an impromptu block party. Grace sat at a corner table, methodically spreading out a stack of receipts and bank statements that Caleb had retrieved from inside. Her brow furrowed as she made notes on her phone's calculator. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of entries. The payments weren't just misapplied, they were deliberately misdirected. She showed Caleb a pattern where his rent checks had been processed days later than their deposit dates. Alma hustled over, her silver hair catching the sunset's glow. She pulled a bundle of worn credit union envelopes from her large purse. "I knew these would come in handy someday. Caleb always shows me his deposit slips, just in case." She patted his shoulder. "Smart man." Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Just trying to keep everything documented." Mrs. Chen approached with a fresh plate of egg rolls, setting them on the table before peering at the paperwork. "Granite Door Management did the same thing to my sister last year. They claimed she was late, but she had proof of payment." "That company's been nothing but trouble since they took over," Mr. Washington added, pulling up a chair. "They raised my mother's rent twice in 6 months, claimed it was for improvements we never saw." Grace's fingers flew across her phone screen as she cross-referenced dates. "There's a pattern here. They're logging payments later than they're received, then charging late fees that compound. It's fraud, plain and simple." More neighbors drifted over, drawn by the conversation. Each had a story. Maintenance requests ignored, mysterious fees added, threatening letters despite timely payments. The tales poured out like water from a broken dam. "I had to take out a payday loan to cover their fake late charges," admitted Mrs. Rodriguez, wringing her hands in her apron. "My grandson's medicine was due that week." Lily appeared at Grace's elbow, clutching her joy jar. The clear container sparkled with fairy lights Alma had strung around it, making the papers inside glow like captured fireflies. "Would you like to see my special notes?" Lily asked Grace. "They help when things get scary." Grace set aside her phone, giving the young girl her full attention. "I'd love to." Lily carefully removed the jar's lid and pulled out several small papers. "This one's from when Dad fixed Mr. Peterson's wheelchair ramp for free." She smoothed out another slip. "And this one's from when Mrs. Alma taught me to make sugar cookies after Mom's recipe got wet in the rain." Grace read each note Lily handed her, treating them with the reverence they deserved. "These are beautiful, Lily. You're capturing all the good things that happen here." "That's the whole point," Lily explained seriously. "Mom always said happiness is like catching lightning bugs. You have to notice when it flashes and be quick to preserve it." A sudden hush fell over the gathering as a courier in a crisp uniform strode up the driveway. He scanned the crowd, then made a beeline for Caleb. "Mr. Hart?" The courier held out a thick envelope. "You've been served." The pleasant atmosphere crackled with tension as Caleb accepted the envelope. His hands were steady as he opened it, but his jaw tightened as he read. Grace leaned forward. "May I?" Caleb handed her the document. She scanned it quickly, her expression darkening. "It's from Vale Development," she announced, voice tight. "They're claiming ownership rights through a purchase agreement with Current Property Management. All residents have 30 days to comply with new terms or vacate." "Vale?" Alma's voice carried across the suddenly silent yard. "That snake who turned the old Miller Street apartments into those overpriced lofts?" "The same," Grace confirmed. "According to this, Granite Door Management has entered into a binding agreement to sell the entire block for neighborhood revitalization." "Revitalization?" Mr. Washington spat the word like it tasted bitter. "That's just fancy talk for kicking us all out." Lily clutched her joy jar closer, the fairy lights casting shadows across her worried face. "But this is our home. she whispered. Caleb wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. It sure is, sunshine. These new terms are impossible, Grace continued, flipping through the pages. They're requiring all month-to-month tenants to sign 2-year leases at double the current rate, plus mandatory improvement fees that aren't even specified. The neighbors huddled closer, decades-old relationships suddenly threatened by corporate letterhead and legal jargon. Mrs. Rodriguez began to cry softly, comforted by Mrs. Chen. They can't do this, Alma declared, her voice ringing with conviction. We're not just random tenants, we're a community. These are our homes. The letter says they can, Grace replied, but her tone suggested she wasn't accepting that as final. She pulled out her phone again, this time pulling up property records. The sale isn't final yet. This is just the first move in their game. Some game, Caleb said quietly. They're playing with people's lives. Lily set her joy jar on the table and pulled out a fresh piece of paper. In careful child's handwriting she wrote, "Today neighbors came together to help my dad." She dropped it in the jar and looked up at the worried faces around her. "We should write one together," she suggested, "for today, because even though that man sent a scary letter, we're all here having dinner like a big family." The simple wisdom of her words seemed to break the spell of fear. Alma was the first to smile. "That child has more sense than most adults," she declared. "She's right. We're together, and that means we're stronger than any developer's threats." Grace watched as Lily passed around papers and pens, encouraging everyone to add to her jar. The fairy lights twinkled against the deepening dusk, each new note a small act of defiance against the corporate letterhead that had tried to shatter their evening. "Mr. Hart?" Grace said quietly, turning to Caleb. "Would you be willing to share copies of your payment records with me? I'd like to look into granite door management more thoroughly." Caleb studied her face for a long moment. "Why are you helping us?" "Because this is wrong," she replied simply. "And because I have the resources to do something about it." Before Caleb could respond, a sharp knock at the front door caught everyone's attention. Alma, closest to the house, went to answer it. She returned moments later with another courier, this one bearing a gilt-edged envelope addressed to Grace Delaney. Grace sat in her modest apartment, staring at her phone. The evening's potluck dishes were barely dried, but she knew this call couldn't wait. Her father's number glowed on the screen, unused for months. Taking a deep breath, she pressed call. The phone rang 4 times before Walter Delaney's gruff voice answered. "Hello? Dad, it's Grace." A long pause filled the line. "Grace? It's late." "I know, I'm sorry. But we need to talk about the Vale development deal." Another pause, shorter this time. "So you heard about that. Your tenants got served with notices tonight. At a neighborhood potluck, Dad. Do you have any idea how that felt?" "Business is business, Grace. You've never understood that." His voice carried that familiar dismissive tone that had driven them apart years ago. "Vale made a good offer." "Better than I expected." Grace pinched the bridge of her nose. "Why didn't you tell me you were selling? I could have helped." "I don't need your help," Walter snapped. "I need to cover my medical bills. The doctors found some things, cognitive tests. I can't manage these properties forever." The revelation hit Grace like a physical blow. "Dad, what tests? When?" "Last month. Early stages, they said, but it's coming." His voice wavered slightly. "The insurance barely covers the specialists. Vale's offer will give me enough to handle whatever's coming." Grace's throat tightened. "There are other ways. We could work something out." "Like what? Your foundation money?" Walter's tone turned bitter. "I won't take charity, not even from my daughter. Besides, these properties are more trouble than they're worth, especially with tenants who don't pay their rent on time." A sharp intake of breath came from behind Grace. She whirled to find Caleb standing in her apartment doorway, a manila envelope of receipts in his hands. She'd forgotten he was coming over to drop off the documentation. "Mr. Hart?" She started, but Caleb's expression had already hardened. "I should go," he said quietly, his dignity wrapping around him like armor. No, wait, Grace covered the phone. Please, let me explain. But Caleb was already backing away. I've heard enough explanations from landlords over the years. At least now I know where you really stand. Caleb. The door clicked shut with devastating finality. Who was that? Walter demanded through the phone. That was Caleb Hart, Grace said, anger seeping into her voice. The tenant you tried to evict today over payments that your management company mishandled. The single father who's never missed a rent payment in 3 years. The veteran who fixes other tenants' appliances for free. Grace, no, Dad, you need to listen. These aren't just properties on a spreadsheet. These are people's homes. Mrs. Rodriguez takes her heart medication every other day to afford your management company's fake late fees. Mr. Washington's mother has lived in that house for 40 years. Lily Hart keeps a jar full of neighbors' kindnesses because that's all she has left of her mother. I can't base business decisions on sentiment, Walter protested, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. This isn't sentiment, it's justice. Grace's fingers flew over her laptop keyboard as she spoke, pulling up property records. Vale's plan requires vacant properties. Did you know that? He's going to force everyone out, tear down their homes, and build luxury condos no one in the neighborhood can afford. That's not my problem. Times change, neighborhoods change. They change because people like Vale force them to change, and people like you help them do it. A notification pinged on Grace's screen. She opened the email, and her heart sank. The properties must be delivered vacant within 90 days of closing, she read aloud. Any remaining tenants will be considered in violation of. Dad, did you even read what you signed? Vale's lawyers handled the details. Vale's lawyers are handling your tenants like they're furniture to be disposed of. Grace's voice cracked. These people trust you. They've paid their rent faithfully for years. Some of them raised their children in these homes. And they'll find other homes, Walter said, but he sounded tired now. That's how it works. It doesn't have to work that way. Grace took a steadying breath. Give me time to find another solution. Please. There is no other solution. I've signed the letter of intent. Vale's lawyers are drawing up the final contracts now. A letter of intent isn't binding. We could. Goodbye, Grace. The line went dead. Grace stared at her phone, tears of frustration burning in her eyes. The email from Vale Development still glowed on her screen, its corporate letterhead and legal language a stark contrast to the warm community gathering she'd witnessed earlier. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alma. Caleb just walked past my house. Looked upset. Everything okay? Grace typed back, No, but I'm not giving up. She looked at the empty manila envelope Caleb had dropped in his hurry to leave. Its contents had scattered across her floor. Dozens of carefully preserved receipts, each one a testimony to his determination to keep a stable home for his daughter. The image of Lily's joy jar floated in her mind, its fairy lights twinkling with defiant hope. Grace opened her laptop and began to type, searching for precedents, loopholes, anything that might help save the homes of people who had become more than just her father's tenants. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Vale Development, marked urgent. Ms. Delaney, as your father's next of kin, we want to ensure you're aware of the terms of our acquisition. The properties must be delivered vacant to facilitate immediate demolition and redevelopment. We trust you'll support your father's decision to sell. Best regards, Derek Vale. Grace's jaw tightened as she read the thinly veiled warning. Vale knew who she was, what resources she had access to. He was trying to discourage her from interfering. She thought of Caleb's face when he'd heard Walter's words, of Lily's careful notes in her joy jar, of Alma rallying the neighbors with chairs and lemonade. The developer might have the legal documents, but these people had something stronger. They had community. Her phone buzzed one final time. A message from her foundation's board. Grace. We've received concerning reports about your personal involvement in a property dispute. Remember our policy on conflicts of interest. The foundation cannot be connected to individual real estate matters. Please clarify your position immediately. Grace's key scraped in the lock of her modest one-bedroom apartment. Inside, the space was neat but Spartan, more like a library reading room than a billionaire's home. Only her wall of overflowing bookshelves hinted at her true passion. She dropped her keys in a ceramic bowl by the door and sank into her favorite reading chair, an old wingback rescued from a thrift store. The evening's events played through her mind like a movie she couldn't pause. Caleb's face when he'd overheard Walter's words, Lily's joy jar glowing with fairy lights, Vale's predatory email. Her laptop hummed to life. Grace pulled up her private email account, the one linked to her role as co-chair of the Horizon Foundation. Few people knew about this part of her life. She preferred it that way. The foundation's work supporting education, housing justice, and community development across the city worked better without fanfare. The cursor blinked as she composed an email to Marion Chen, the foundation's legal counsel. Marion, need urgent guidance on potential conflict of interest. Local property owner, my father, selling to developer. Multiple families face displacement. Foundation previously funded housing advocacy in affected neighborhood. Can I assist residents personally without compromising foundation position? Time sensitive. Grace she hit send and waited, knowing Marion often worked late. While watching for a response, Grace opened her foundation files. The numbers scrolled past, millions in grants supporting tenant rights organizations, community land trusts, and affordable housing initiatives. All of it could be frozen if she made one wrong move. Her email pinged. Marion's response was characteristically direct. Grace, red flag. Your personal involvement in property dispute involving family member creates clear conflict. Foundation bylaws strict on this. Board must maintain absolute separation from individual real estate matters. Any direct assistance to tenants could trigger asset freeze pending review. Recommend complete non-involvement to protect foundation interests. Will brief board tomorrow. Ever for Marion. A second email arrived moments later. P.S. Off the record, I know this must be difficult, but you've spent years building Horizon's impact. Don't risk it all on one block. There are other ways to help. Grace pressed her palms against her eyes. Marion was right. The foundation's work was too important to jeopardize. They funded dozens of organizations, supported hundreds of families, trained countless advocates. But these weren't faceless statistics. These were her neighbors. She thought of Lily's careful handwriting in the joy jar. Today Mrs. Rios taught me to make tamales. Mr. Washington fixed my bike. Daddy helped Pastor May carry boxes, each note a thread in the fabric of community that Vale wanted to tear apart. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alma. Can't sleep. Thinking about everyone. What's our next step? Grace typed back. Working on it. Need to be careful, but not giving up. She opened a new document and began typing, her fingers flying over the keys as she outlined what she knew. The solution would require threading a very narrow needle. She couldn't use foundation resources or influence, but she could act as a private citizen. She couldn't fight Vale directly, but she could help the community organize. She couldn't stop the sale immediately, but she could buy time. The sky outside her window began to lighten. Grace changed into running clothes and laced up her shoes. Her morning jogs helped her think, and she needed clarity now more than ever. The pre-dawn air was crisp as she ran her usual route through the neighborhood, past the church where Rev. May would be preparing for morning prayers, past Mr. Washington tending his roses, past the playground where Lily and her friends had tied ribbons to the fence. By the time she returned home, sweat-soaked but energized, she had a plan. Grace showered quickly and walked to the copy shop as it opened. The elderly owner, Mr. Chen, smiled in recognition. "Early bird today, Miss Grace." "Need these right away, Mr. Chen." She handed him a USB drive. 300 copies, please. He peered at the document on his screen. Community Town Hall tonight, 7 p.m. First Hope Church Fellowship Hall topic. Our neighborhood's future all residents, welcome light refreshments. Provided making trouble? Mr. Chen's eyes twinkled. Always, Grace smiled. But the good kind. Back in her apartment, Grace made more lists. She'd need to move carefully, stay within legal bounds, protect the foundation's work while finding other ways to help. It wouldn't be easy, but then nothing worthwhile ever was. She thought of her mother's favorite saying, "Do things right," or "don't do them at all." Mom had insisted on that clause in the original deeds, the one requiring tenant notification of any sale. She'd believed in doing things right too. Grace pinned one of the flyers to her bulletin board and stood back, arms crossed. The simple announcement felt like a declaration of war, but also a promise to Caleb, to Lily, to all her neighbors. She would find a way to help them fight, not as a foundation co-chair, but as Grace Delaney, resident of Cedar Street. Her phone buzzed with another message from Marion. Board meeting tomorrow at 9. They'll want answers. Grace replied, I'll be there. Everything will be done properly. She glanced at her watch. Time to start distributing flyers before people left for work. She grabbed her stack of papers and headed for the door, pausing only to water the small potted plant on her windowsill, a housewarming gift from Alma 3 years ago. Things would have to be handled delicately, precisely, and absolutely by the book. But they would be handled. Grace had spent her life learning how to make change within the rules. Now she would use those skills to protect her neighbors, one careful step at a time. The church fellowship hall buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in, filling the metal folding chairs. Grace stood near the entrance, handing out meeting agendas. The familiar scent of coffee and Mrs. Rios's cinnamon rolls wafted through the air, but even these comforts couldn't ease the tension. Derek Vale commanded attention at the front of the room, his designer suit a stark contrast to the worn linoleum floor and humble surroundings. A sleek projection screen displayed computer-rendered images of modern apartments and trendy shops. Ladies and gentlemen, Vale's voice carried smoothly across the room, what you're looking at is the future of Cedar Street. He clicked through more images. Imagine brand new housing units with modern amenities, green spaces, retail opportunities. This is what progress looks like. In the third row, Lily sat between Caleb and Alma, her joy jar clutched tightly in her lap. Caleb's jaw tightened as Vale continued his presentation. We're talking about a complete transformation. Vale gestured to another slide showing property values. Current residents will receive relocation assistance, of course, and the neighborhood's value will increase significantly. And where exactly are we supposed to go? The question came from Mr. Sevent, Washington, who'd lived on Cedar Street for 40 years. Vale's smile never wavered. Our team will provide resources for finding new housing within your budget range. Alma stood up, a worn notebook in her hands. Before we talk about relocation, I'd like to share something. She opened the notebook and adjusted her reading glasses. Mrs. Chen worked 3 jobs to buy her house after her husband passed. She's lived there 28 years. The Washingtons raised 5 children in their home. They've got grandchildren playing in that yard now. She turned a page. Tommy Rodriguez's mother planted those rose bushes when he came home from Vietnam. They're still blooming every spring. Her voice grew stronger. These aren't just properties, Mr. Vale. These are our homes. Our stories. Vale's expression tightened slightly. Progress requires change, Mrs. Rios. We can't let sentiment stand in the way of development. Grace moved to the front of the room. What if there was another option? She took a deep breath, conscious of every eye on her. We could form a community land trust. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vale's polished smile faltered. A land trust would allow us to purchase and maintain these properties collectively, Grace explained. Residents could stay in their homes. Rents would remain affordable. The community would have control over its own future. And where would the money come from? Vale's tone was dismissive. These properties are worth millions. We can raise funds, Grace said firmly. Apply for grants, work with local credit unions, create a community ownership model that benefits everyone. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Some residents nodded eagerly, while others looked skeptical. Mr. Washington raised his hand. How do we know this isn't just another scheme? Before Grace could answer, her phone buzzed. The message from her foundation board made her blood run cold. One more move, and we'll freeze assets. As she stared at her phone, Vale's assistants began moving through the aisles, distributing thick envelopes. The room fell silent as people opened them to find 30-day eviction notices. Unfortunately, Vale's voice cut through the shocked silence. The sale is already in motion. These notices are just a formality to begin the process. Lily's voice piped up, clear and innocent. But where will we put our joy jar? The simple question hung in the air. Caleb wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders, his expression pained. This meeting is over, Vale announced, gathering his materials. My office will be available to discuss relocation options. People began filing out of the hall in small groups, clutching their eviction notices and whispering among themselves. Some shot angry looks at Vale, others looked defeated. Alma moved through the crowd, squeezing hands and whispering words of encouragement. Grace stood in the parking lot, watching taillights disappear into the darkness. The church's exterior lights cast long shadows across the asphalt. Caleb approached her, Lily asleep in his arms, the joy jar dangling from his fingers. "You didn't mention you were on a foundation board," he said quietly. Grace met his eyes. "No, I didn't. And now they're threatening to freeze your assets if you help us?" "They are." Caleb shifted Lily's weight, his expression troubled. "Will you risk everything for us?" Grace looked at Lily's peaceful face, then back at Caleb. The church's bell tower rose behind them, a silent sentinel in the night sky. "Not if we do it right," she replied. The morning sun filtered through the church office windows, casting warm patterns across the scattered papers on Reverend May's desk. 8 people sat in a tight circle: Grace, Caleb, Alma, Reverend May, Ms. Klein, and 3 other neighbors chosen for their experience in construction, banking, and real estate. Ms. Klein, a sharp-featured attorney in her 50s, adjusted her reading glasses and spread out several documents. Her no-nonsense demeanor commanded attention as she spoke. "First things first," she said, tapping a blue folder. "We need to incorporate the Community Land Trust as a proper legal entity. That means bylaws, a board structure, and clear operating procedures." Caleb leaned forward in his chair, his work boots scuffing against the carpet. "How long will all that take?" "With my office working overtime, we can have the basic framework done in days." Ms. Klein made quick notes on her legal pad, "but that's just step 1. We'll need an escrow account immediately to show good faith in any negotiations." Grace nodded. "I can help coordinate with local credit unions for that." "Good." Ms. Klein continued down her list. "Next, we need professional appraisals and thorough inspections of all properties. That's non-negotiable if we want to secure financing." Reverend May raised her hand. "I know a certified appraiser who attends First Methodist. She might expedite things for us." "Perfect." Ms. Klein wrote down the contact information. "Now, about the organizational structure, we need paid staff positions to manage this properly." She looked directly at Caleb. "Mr. Hart, given your maintenance background and knowledge of these properties, we'd like to propose you as our facilities director." Caleb stiffened. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not looking for charity." "This isn't charity," Ms. Klein replied firmly. "It's a professional position with real responsibilities. The trust needs someone who knows these buildings inside and out." Alma reached over and patted Caleb's arm. "Hee-ho, there's dignity in fair pay for honest work. You've been maintaining these properties for years without proper compensation. That stops now." "Mrs. Rios is right," Ms. Klein added. "A community land trust only works when we value everyone's contributions appropriately." Caleb sat back, clearly uncomfortable but considering their words. "I'll think about it." Grace checked her watch and stood up. "I need to step out for a bit. I'm meeting my father for coffee, going to try one more time to talk about selling to the trust instead of Vale." The group watched her go, aware of how much rode on that conversation. 20 minutes later, Grace sat across from Walter Delaney in a downtown coffee shop. Her father looked older than she remembered, his hands slightly shaky as he stirred his coffee. "The trust is a viable option, Dad," Grace said carefully. "They're getting organized, bringing in professional help. Vale's offering market rate." Walter cut her off. "Clean deal, no complications." He took a sip of coffee. "These people can't match his price. These people are your tenants. Some have lived there for decades." Walter's expression hardened. "And now they'll get relocation assistance. That's more than fair." "Is it?" Grace leaned forward. "What about Mrs. Chen? The Washingtons? People who've maintained their homes, paid their rent on time." "Vale's offer is better," Walter insisted. "I need to think about my future, my medical expenses." He pushed his cup away. "I'm not running a charity, Grace. Neither am I. I'm talking about a legitimate business transaction that benefits everyone." Walter stood up, ending the conversation. "I've already signed the letter of intent. Tell your friends to take the relocation assistance when it's offered." He grabbed his coat. "Some things just have to change." Grace watched him leave, her own coffee growing cold. She pulled out her phone to text the steering committee. No luck with Walter. Moving to Plan B. Back at the church, Ms. Klein was outlining inspection requirements when Grace returned. The attorney paused, reading Grace's expression. "I take it we're proceeding without Mr. Delaney's cooperation?" Grace nodded, sinking into her chair. "He's committed to Vale's offer." "Then we'll need to work faster," Ms. Klein said, turning to a new page in her notes. "I've drafted the incorporation papers. Everyone here needs to review them before we file." She handed out thick packets of legal documents. "Pay special attention to the governance structure. We want this airtight." The group spent the next hour going through the papers line by line. Mrs. Washington, who'd worked at a bank for 30 years, asked detailed questions about the financial oversight provisions. Mr. Rodriguez, a retired contractor, focused on the maintenance requirements. "One more thing," Ms. Klein said as they finished. "We need to schedule a community meeting to elect the full board. That's crucial for our legitimacy." Alma was already checking the church calendar. "We can use the fellowship hall tomorrow evening. I'll start calling people." Caleb cleared his throat. "About that facilities position." He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "If you really think I'm the right person, I'll do it. But I want to earn my way." "You already have," Alma said softly. "Now it's time to let your community support you properly." Ms. Klein pulled out another document. "I have the job description and proposed salary range right here. Review it. Make sure you're comfortable with the responsibilities." As Caleb read through the paperwork, Reverend May suggested a closing prayer. The group joined hands, forming a circle in the morning light. "Lord," the Reverend began, "guide us as we build something new. Give us wisdom in our planning, strength in our work, and faith in each other." "Amen." "Amen," they echoed. Ms. Klein gathered her materials. "I'll file these papers today. Grace, can you start on the escrow account? Everyone else knows their assignments." She stood, straightening her jacket. "Remember, every day counts now. Vale won't wait forever." The group dispersed, each person clutching their tasks, lists, and documents. Caleb lingered, still holding the job description. "You okay?" Grace asked him. He nodded slowly. "Just never thought I'd be on this side of things, running maintenance instead of just doing it job by job." "You'll be great at it," Grace assured him. "Nobody knows these buildings better." Caleb carefully folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "Lily will be proud. She always says we should help take care of our neighbors." A small smile crossed his face. "Guess now it'll be official." Evening settled over the neighborhood like a soft blanket, bringing with it the kind of peaceful warmth that made front porches feel like sanctuaries. Porch lights flickered on one by one, creating a gentle glow along the street. Caleb stood on a stepladder in front of the community bulletin board, carefully mounting a large white sign. In bold black numbers he wrote 27 and underneath, "Days to Save Our Homes." His practiced handyman strokes made the numbers look strong and determined. Mrs. Washington rocked in her porch chair, her arthritis-curved fingers busy with knitting needles. 27 days, she called out. Seems both forever and no time at all. We'll make each one count, Caleb replied, stepping down from the ladder. Lily emerged from their house carrying her beloved joy jar, its glass surface catching the last rays of sunlight. Construction paper hearts and stars decorated its sides, and inside were countless folded notes, each one a recorded blessing or act of kindness. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but sure, "I want this to be the first donation." She held the jar up like an offering. Caleb knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, that's your special jar. All your good memories are in there." "That's why," Lily insisted. "Maybe if we share our joy, it'll grow bigger." She looked up at him with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "Like when you plant seeds." From her porch, Alma watched the exchange, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "That child," she whispered, then raised her voice. "I'll match whatever's in that jar, Querida." Other neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the activity. Mr. Rodriguez, a Vietnam veteran who'd kept his military precision, approached with a notepad. "Got 5 of us veterans ready to tackle repairs. Figure we can shore up the worst problems before inspections. I'll coordinate with the seniors for canvassing, Mrs." Chen called from her stoop. "We may be old, but we know everyone in town." Inside the church office, Grace and Reverend May bent over legal documents spread across the desk. A small lamp cast a warm circle around them as they worked. "If we structure it as a private charitable gift through the church," Grace explained, pointing to a paragraph, "it stays separate from the foundation. No conflict of interest." Reverend May adjusted her reading glasses. "And matching funds could double whatever the community raises?" "Exactly." Grace circled key phrases. "Anonymous donor, funds held in escrow by the church, clean and clear. The Lord does provide." Reverend May smiled, sometimes through very careful paperwork. Back in the Heart's kitchen, the scent of baking pies filled every corner. Caleb checked the oven temperature while Lily carefully crimped the edges of a cherry pie crust, her small fingers making each fold with concentration. "Like this, Daddy?" she asked, holding up her work for inspection. "Perfect, baby girl." He smiled, remembering how Sarah used to do the same crimping pattern. "Your mama would be proud." "She taught me in my heart," Lily said matter-of-factly, returning to her task. "I can feel her helping when I bake." Caleb swallowed hard and busied himself with preparing another pie tin. 4 pies already cooled on the counter: apple, peach, and 2 blueberry. The fundraiser needed at least 8. Outside, more neighbors gathered on porches and sidewalks as twilight deepened. Someone started humming "Amazing Grace," and others joined in. The melody floated down the street, carried by voices young and old. Mrs. Washington set aside her knitting and pulled out a small notebook. "We need to make lists," she announced to those nearby. "Who knows who can ask for what?" "The quilting circle at First Baptist might help," offered Miss Taylor from next door. "They love a good cause." "And the VFW," added Mr. Rodriguez. "They've got resources." Lily appeared on the sidewalk, carefully carrying her joy jar to where Alma had set up a card table. A hand-lettered sign read, "Community Land Trust Fund," with a coffee can for donations. "First gift," Lily announced, placing her jar next to the can. She pulled out one note and read it aloud. "Joy is when Daddy fixes Mrs. Chen's stairs and she makes dumplings for thank you." Mrs. Chen wiped her eyes. "Such a good memory, little one." One by one, neighbors approached the table. Some dropped in bills, Others wrote checks. A few children added their allowance money. Each contribution, no matter the size, was met with thank yous and blessing. Inside the church, Grace finished signing the matching fund documents. "This could work," she said softly. "If we can raise enough locally, we will," Reverend May assured her. "Faith isn't just believing, it's doing." The smell of fresh-baked pies drifted through the Hart's open windows. Caleb pulled the last two from the oven. Another cherry and a sugar-crusted apple. 8 pies total, ready for tomorrow's sale. "They're beautiful," Lily declared, standing on tiptoe to see them all lined up. "Like a pie parade." "A what?" Caleb laughed. "A pie parade." She gestured at the row of golden crusts. "See? They're marching to help save our home." Caleb touched her hair gently. "Yes, they are, baby. Yes, they are." The evening wound down slowly, like a gentle exhale. Porch lights still glowed as neighbors said their goodnights. The countdown board stood sentinel. 27 days to turn hope into reality. Mrs. Washington gathered her knitting. "One day down," she said. 26 to go, and every minute counts," Alma added, securing the donation can and Lily's joy jar for safekeeping. The hymn had faded, but its echo remained in the spirit of shared purpose that hung in the air. 27 days didn't seem quite so daunting when faced together. Thursday morning arrived with hammers echoing through the neighborhood. Veterans in work clothes swarmed over porches and railings, replacing rotted boards and tightening loose steps. Mr. Rodriguez directed operations like a seasoned commander, clipboard in hand. "Johnson, shore up that banister. Chen needs new treads on those stairs." He checked items off his list. "Remember, folks, everything has to pass inspection." Caleb moved from house to house, his tools organized in his old work belt. He checked electrical outlets and repaired loose fixtures, showing younger volunteers the proper techniques. "See how you wrap the wire?" he demonstrated to Tommy, Mrs. Washington's grandson. "Always clockwise, nice and tight." Inside the church basement, the quilting circle had taken over 3 long tables. Fabric squares in jewel tones and warm pastels spread out like gardens. Mrs. Washington supervised from her padded chair, arthritis not stopping her expert eye. "That pattern needs to be centered, dear," she called to one worker. "We want these perfect for auction." Grace spent Thursday afternoon making calls from her small apartment, coordinating with the escrow company and church trustees. Legal papers covered her kitchen table, each one crucial to the matching fund structure. By Friday morning, the neighborhood hummed with activity. Alma's kitchen became command central for the bake sale, with mixing bowls and cooling racks covering every surface. Women moved in, practiced rhythm, measuring and stirring. "More vanilla in those snickerdoodles," Alma directed, "and watch that timer for the banana bread." Lily flitted between helpers, delivering measuring cups and gathering empty bowls. Her joy jar sat in a place of honor on the windowsill, catching morning light. "Need more eggs," someone called out. "Got them right here," Mrs. Chen answered, arriving with 3 fresh cartons. Outside, Rev May and the choir director arranged folding chairs on the church lawn. They set up a simple platform for the singers, testing microphones and speakers. "Check, check," the director spoke into the mic. "Can you hear me by the oak tree?" "Clear as a bell," came the response. Saturday dawned bright and cool. Before the sun fully rose, people were already setting up tables and tents on the church grounds. Caleb arranged his pies carefully on a red checkered cloth, 8 beautiful creations waiting for buyers. The quilts hung on display lines, catching morning light. Each one told a story, traditional patterns handed down through generations, modern designs bursting with color. Mrs. Washington sat proudly beside them, ready to share their history with potential buyers. By 10 o'clock, the lawn filled with neighbors and visitors. The children's choir opened with "This Little Light of Mine," young voices rising clear and sweet. Lily stood among them, her face shining as she sang, Tables groaned under mountains of baked goods. Alma's snickerdoodles sold out within the first hour. Church ladies wrapped purchases in wax paper, counting money carefully. Another apple pie sold, called Mrs. Chen, adding the money to the collection box. The adult choir took their turn, filling the air with four-part harmony. Amazing Grace floated across the gathering, followed by Blessed Assurance. People swayed gently, some wiping tears. Grace moved through the crowd quietly, watching joy spread across familiar faces. She checked her phone. 8 escrow account was ready. Everything was in place for the announcement. Near noon, Rev May stepped up to the microphone. The crowd hushed, gathering closer. "Brothers and sisters," she began, her voice warm and strong. "We've come together today in faith and purpose, and I have wonderful news to share." She gestured to Grace, who joined her on the platform. Grace took a deep breath, remembering the carefully prepared words. "An anonymous donor has offered to match every dollar we raise today," she announced. "Whatever we collect will be doubled through a special fund held by the church." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by applause and cheers. Alma dabbed at her eyes with her apron corner. Caleb stood very still, one hand on Lily's shoulder. The afternoon blazed with renewed energy. More people arrived, drawn by phone calls and text messages spreading the news. The VFW showed up in force, checkbooks ready. Church groups from across town came to support their sister congregation. Quilts went up for auction, bringing spirited bidding. Mrs. Washington's prize, log cabin pattern, started a minor bidding war between two collectors. Children dropped allowance money into collection jars, adding to the growing total. The youth choir sang again at 4 o'clock, this time performing "Lean on Me." Lily's voice carried the descant, floating above the others like a silver thread. Caleb watched from the pie table, his heart so full it hurt. As evening approached, Reverend May called everyone together once more. She held up a calculator, her hands trembling slightly. "With the matching funds," she announced, her voice breaking, "we have reached half our goal." The crowd erupted. People hugged and cried, laughing through tears. Alma started singing, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow," and others joined in, the doxology rising like a prayer of thanksgiving. Lily ran to her father, jumping into his arms. "We're halfway there, Daddy, we're halfway there." Caleb held her tight, his own eyes wet. "Yes, we are, baby girl, yes, we are." Mrs. Washington sat in her chair, beaming at the empty quilt lines. Every single one had sold. Mr. Rodriguez gathered his veteran crew, proud of their contribution through repairs and donations. Grace stood slightly apart, watching the celebration. They had done it, reached the halfway point through legitimate means, no foundation rules broken. For the first time since the crisis began, real hope seemed possible. The sun lowered toward the horizon, painting the church grounds in golden light. Empty pie tins and cookie trays testified to the day's success. The counting committee sat in the church office, carefully tallying final totals. Joy bubbled through the crowd like a spring, touching each person with its current. Children played tag between the tables while adults gathered in happy groups, reliving the day's best moments. Remember when Mrs. Lee bid against herself for that quilt? And those pies? Gone in the first 2 hours. Did you hear the children's choir? Angels, absolute angels. The matching funds announcement had transformed their steady progress into a leap toward their goal. What had seemed impossible now felt within reach. Half the mountain had been climbed. The porch light cast a yellow glow as Mrs. Chen hurried up Caleb's front steps, clutching a manila envelope. Her normally calm face showed clear distress. Caleb opened the door before she could knock. "You need to see these," she said, pressing the envelope into his hands. Her voice shook. "I found them when I was cleaning out my mother's files." Inside, Caleb found a stack of papers, rental notices, payment records, and correspondence with Granite Door Management. His eyes widened as he scanned the documents. "Come in." he said quickly, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Let me call Grace." Lily sat at the kitchen table working on homework, her pencil moving steadily across math problems. She looked up as Mrs. Chen settled into a chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Would you like some tea?" Caleb offered, reaching for his phone. Mrs. Chen nodded. "Yes, please. My nerves are shot from reading these all afternoon." Grace arrived 20 minutes later, her hair slightly disheveled as if she'd rushed over. She spread the documents across the kitchen table, examining each one carefully. "These late notices," she said, pointing to several papers. "The dates don't match the bank records." Mrs. Chen nodded. "My mother kept everything, every receipt, every notice. When I compared them to her bank statements," she trailed off, hands trembling as she accepted the mug of tea Caleb offered. Grace pulled out her phone and began taking photos of the documents. "The management company backdated these notices. They claimed payments were late when they weren't. They did the same thing to us," Caleb said quietly. "I thought I was going crazy, trying to match up my receipts with their notices." Lily had abandoned her homework and was watching the adults with worried eyes. She got up and retrieved her joy jar from the windowsill, holding it close. Grace's fingers flew over her phone screen. "I'm sending these to Ms. Klein right now. This is fraud, plain and simple." The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet clicking of Grace's phone and the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, crickets chirped in the growing darkness. "There's more," Mrs. Chen said finally. She pulled another sheet from the envelope. "This memo, it shows they had a system. They targeted certain tenants, ones they thought wouldn't fight back." Grace's expression hardened as she read the memo. "This is going to the State Attorney General's office tonight. And the Housing Authority." Caleb stared at the papers spread across his table. "All this time we thought it was our fault, that we must have messed up somewhere." "That's what they wanted us to think, Mrs. Chen said bitterly. "My mother was so careful with her money, she died believing she'd somehow failed." Lily moved to her father's side and slipped her small hand into his. He squeezed it gently, grateful for her quiet support. Grace gathered the documents carefully, sorting them into organized piles. "We'll need statements from everyone affected. Ms. Klein can help coordinate that." "What about Mr. Vale?" Lily asked suddenly. "Won't he be mad?" The adults exchanged glances. "Probably," Grace admitted, "but the truth matters more than his feelings." The next morning, Grace's prediction proved accurate. Vale's PR team flooded local news with statements about chronic problems and documentation issues on Maple Street. Social media buzzed with carefully worded suggestions about mismanagement and disorder. At church, Rev May stood in her pulpit, her gentle face serious as she opened her Bible. The pews were full, tension mixing with the usual Sunday morning peace. "Our reading today comes from Ephesians," she began. "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another." Her sermon wove through stories of truth-tellers throughout history, prophets and poets, ordinary people who chose right over easy. The congregation sat very still, absorbing her words. "Truth walks," she said, her voice carrying to the rafters. "It doesn't run and hide. It doesn't dress itself in fancy words or legal tricks. Truth walks, steady and sure, in the light of day." Caleb sat with Lily, aware of whispers and glances from visitors who'd seen Vale's media blast. His daughter's spine was straight, her chin up, refusing to be shamed. After the service, people gathered in small groups, sharing what they knew. Mrs. Chen's documents had opened a flood of similar stories. Ms. Klein moved through the crowd with her notebook, recording details and dates. By afternoon, Vale's team had shifted strategy. Now they portrayed the entire street as tied up in legal complications, too messy for any reasonable development plan. "That's their game, Ms. Foer," Klein explained to the steering committee, meeting in the church basement. "They're trying to poison the well, make it look like the whole neighborhood is radioactive." Grace checked her phone constantly, monitoring the growing social media storm. Her carefully structured plans seemed to be unraveling in real time. As evening approached, she drove to her father's house. The late summer sun cast long shadows across his unkempt lawn. Walter opened the door slowly, looking tired and pale. "I suppose you're here about those ridiculous allegations," he said before she could speak. Grace followed him into the living room, noting how he shuffled slightly, one hand brushing the wall for balance. "They're not allegations, Dad. They're facts. I have the proof, right here." She pulled out copies of the documents. Walter waved them away. "Management companies make mistakes. Papers get misfiled. It's not some grand conspiracy." "This wasn't a mistake." Grace's voice was firm. "They deliberately falsified records. They stole from your tenants, people you've known for years." "You don't understand how these things work," Walter said dismissively, but his face was drawn. "Sometimes you have to take a firm hand with—" "With what?" Grace interrupted. "With honest people trying to keep a roof over their heads? People like Mrs. Chen's mother, who never missed a payment in 15 years? Walter turned away, moving to his favorite chair. Grace noticed how heavily he sat, how his hands trembled slightly. "What's done is done," he muttered. "Vale's offer is solid. The papers are nearly ready." "Dad, you're being used. Vale knows about the fraud. He's counting on it to drive down property values and force people out." "I'm tired," Walter said. His voice sounded thin, strained. "I can't fight about this anymore." Grace studied him with growing concern. The stubborn father she remembered seemed diminished somehow, less certain. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, moving closer. "You don't look well." "I'm fine," he snapped, but his color was poor and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's comfortable temperature. "Just leave it alone, Grace. Some battles aren't worth fighting." Grace stood in her father's living room, the proof of fraud in her hands, watching him retreat into denial and fatigue. Outside, the sun set on another day of their dwindling time, painting the windows in shades of amber and rose. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Grace fumbled for her phone in the dark, heart racing when she saw her father's neighbor's number. He just collapsed in his driveway. "Mrs. Peterson said," her voice shaking, "the ambulance is on its way." Grace threw on clothes and rushed to the hospital. In the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room waiting area, she paced, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. The minutes crawled by like hours. A gentle touch on her shoulder made her jump. Caleb stood there, still in his work clothes, concern etched on his face. "Alma called me," he explained softly. "Said you might need someone to wait with you." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to come. No one should sit in an ER alone." He guided her to a chair, then went to the vending machine. He returned with 2 cups of mediocre coffee. The waiting room was nearly empty at this late hour. A quiet news channel played on the wall-mounted TV, closed captions scrolling past. The coffee was bitter, but Grace wrapped her cold hands around the warm cup gratefully. "He looked so tired earlier," she said after a while. "I should have noticed something was wrong. I was too focused on the documents, the fraud." "Hey," Caleb said gently, "don't do that to yourself. Sometimes things just happen." Grace stared into her coffee cup. "I keep thinking I can fix everything if I just work hard enough, plan carefully enough. But I'm scared of making things worse." "Worse how? What if I help wrong?" The words tumbled out. "What if my foundation board is right? What if personal involvement clouds judgment? What if good intentions aren't enough?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "After Sarah died, my wife, people wanted to help, church members, neighbors, but I couldn't stand the idea of being a charity case. My pride got in the way. I thought I had to prove I could handle everything alone." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. "I was so focused on not accepting help that I didn't see how my stubbornness was hurting Lily. Kids at school noticed her worn-out shoes. She stopped inviting friends over because we couldn't afford snacks. Grace listened intently as Caleb spoke, his voice low and measured. "Sometimes the wrong help is better than no help at all," he said. "At least it shows someone cares enough to try." A doctor appeared in the doorway. "Family of Walter Delaney?" Grace stood quickly. "I'm his daughter. Your father had a minor stroke." The doctor explained. "We caught it early, which is good. He's stable now, but he'll need monitoring and some lifestyle changes." Relief made Grace's knees weak. Caleb steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Can I see him?" The doctor nodded. Briefly. "He's tired, but alert." Walter looked small in the hospital bed, monitoring wires snaking under his gown. His eyes were clearer than they'd been earlier, though fatigue lined his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered when Grace approached. "Should have listened about slowing down." "Just rest, Dad." She squeezed his hand gently. "We'll figure everything out later." She stayed until he drifted off to sleep, then returned to the waiting room. Caleb had remained, despite the late hour. "He's resting," she told him. "Thank you for staying." "Of course." He checked his watch. "I should head home, Lily's with Alma, but it's getting late." They walked to the parking lot together. The night air was cool, crickets chirping in the hospital's landscaping. "Grace," Caleb said as they reached their cars, "what you're doing for the neighborhood, it matters. Even if it's not perfect." She managed a small smile. "Thanks. I needed to hear that tonight." The next morning dawned gray and humid. Grace worked from her laptop in her father's hospital room while he slept. The doctors wanted to run more tests, monitor his blood pressure. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb just after lunch. "Need to meet. Bank issue. Important." She found him in the bank's lobby 20 minutes later. His face was tight with tension. "Vale bought the mortgage note," he said without preamble. "The bank just told me. He's filing for technical default based on maintenance issues." Grace felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. "He can't do that. The payments are current. Apparently there's some clause about property upkeep. Vale's saying the whole block is below standard." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. "He had inspectors out last week. We thought they were routine. They sat in Grace's car, reviewing the default notice. Vale's team had documented every crack, every peeling shingle, every wobbly railing. Items that would normally warrant repair notices were being used to justify immediate default. This is how he operates," Grace said, scanning the documents. "He finds technical violations, uses them as leverage. Most people can't afford to fight back. So, what do we do?" Grace checked her phone. No messages from her foundation board, which wasn't surprising. They'd made their position clear. "We fight back anyway," she said firmly. "Ms. Klein needs to see these papers, and we need to document every repair we've requested that management ignored." Caleb nodded slowly. "I've got records going back 3 years. Maintenance requests that were never answered." "Good. That helps show this isn't about actual concern for building safety." Grace started the car. "Let's go talk to Ms. Klein." As they drove, Grace glanced at Caleb. His jaw was set, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. "I know." He managed a slight smile. "Like you said, we fight back." The fluorescent lights in Ms. Klein's office buzzed overhead as she spread the default notice across her desk. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose while she studied the documents, her frown deepening with each page. "This is aggressive," she said finally, looking up at Grace and Caleb. "Vale's using every technicality he can find." Rain drummed against the window behind her desk. The afternoon had turned dark and stormy, matching their mood. "Can he do this?" Caleb asked, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Ms. Klein removed her glasses. "He can, and will, trigger emergency inspections. The mortgage terms give him that right. Once he documents code violations, he can petition for immediate action." Grace's phone buzzed. The foundation board's number flashed on the screen. Her stomach dropped as she read the message. "Assets frozen pending review. all grants suspended. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the phone face down on Ms. Klein's desk. The foundation just froze my funds. Caleb's expression tightened. All of them, she nodded, throat tight. Everything. Thunder cracked outside, making them all jump. Ms. Klein's desk phone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the tense silence. "Klein here," she answered. Her face grew grave as she listened. "I see. Yes. We'll respond immediately." She hung up and looked at Caleb. "Vale's inspector is at your house right now. They're citing immediate safety concerns." "What?" Caleb stood so quickly his chair scraped backward. "They can't just—" "They can." Ms. Klein interrupted gently. "And they are." They rushed through the rain to Caleb's house. A city inspector in a yellow raincoat was already mounting the porch steps, clipboard in hand. Vale stood under a black umbrella nearby, his expensive shoes carefully placed to avoid puddles. "Mr. Hart," Vale called out smoothly, "just a routine safety check, nothing to worry about if everything's up to code." The inspector spent 45 minutes going through the house. He noted loose wiring in the kitchen, a crack in the foundation, inadequate ventilation in the bathroom. Each item was photographed, measured, documented. Lily came home from school during the inspection, her backpack clutched to her chest as she watched the stranger move through their home. She pressed close to Caleb's side, her small face worried. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Are we in trouble?" Before Caleb could answer, his phone chimed with an alert. Someone had posted a video online. Local man scams charity with fake eviction story. The clip showed his earlier eviction, edited to make it look staged. Comments were already piling up, calling him a fraud. Grace watched the color drain from his face as he read. "Caleb." He shook his head sharply, stepping away from her offered comfort. The inspector finally finished, handing Vale his report with a grim expression. Vale scanned it, his satisfied smile visible even through the rain. "As suspected," he announced, "multiple code violations requiring immediate attention. I'll have the emergency order within the hour." True to his word, a courier arrived just before sunset with a judge's temporary order to vacate. The paper was already wilting in the continuing rain, but the legal language was clear. The house was deemed unsafe for occupancy. Neighbors gathered on their porches, watching. Some who'd stood with them days ago now whispered behind their hands, eyeing Caleb with new suspicion. The viral video had done its damage. After dark, when Lily had finally fallen asleep on Mrs. Rios's couch next door, Caleb sat alone on his porch. The rain had settled into a quiet drizzle. He pulled out the cardboard boxes they'd just unpacked days ago, starting to refold them with mechanical precision. The porch light cast long shadows across the wet lawn. Each car that passed made him tense, wondering if it was another inspector, another official, another person coming to watch his life unravel. Small footsteps padded across the porch. Lily stood in her pajamas, clutching her joy jar. She must have woken up and slipped away from Mrs. Rios's watchful eye. "Baby, you should be sleeping," Caleb said softly. Instead of answering, Lily sat next to him on the step. She unscrewed the lid of her jar, the same jar that had started this whole chain of events when she'd cried over it during their first eviction. Now she turned it over, letting all the paper slips fall into Caleb's hands. "Maybe our joy makes the path," she whispered. Her voice small but steady in the dark. Caleb stared at the pile of papers in his palms. Each one held a moment of happiness, a blessing counted, a hope recorded in his daughter's careful handwriting. Their whole life in scraps of paper, now scattered like fallen leaves. A single streetlight illuminated the empty jar as Lily held it. The glass caught the light, throwing fractured rainbows across her serious face. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that Caleb's chest ached. "I can start collecting new joy tomorrow," she said. "But tonight, maybe you need our old joy more." Caleb pulled her close, pressing his face into her damp curls to hide his tears. The paper slips crinkled between them, years of collected happiness crushed in his desperate embrace. They sat there together in the dim light, watching the drizzle turn their lawn into a silver mirror of streetlights and shadows. The empty joy jar stood sentinel beside them, waiting to be filled again. Inside the house, the boxes waited too, ready to once again hold their belongings, their memories, their displaced lives. But for this moment, Caleb just held his daughter and their handful of written joys, trying to believe that somewhere in all this darkness there really was a path. The church sanctuary was dark except for a few flickering candles when Grace slipped in before dawn. The wooden pews creaked as early risers filed in quietly. Outside, the sky hadn't yet begun to lighten. Rev. May stood at the altar, spreading out building plans and property maps in a circle. The blueprints curled at the edges, held down by well-worn hymnals. Her silver hair caught the candlelight as she arranged everything with careful hands. Alma arrived carrying thermoses of coffee and a box of paper cups. She set them up at the back of the church, the rich aroma mixing with the familiar scent of old wood and prayer books. Other neighbors trickled in: Mrs. Chen from the corner house, Mr. Rodriguez, who always shoveled everyone's walks in winter, the Williams sisters who ran the daycare. Caleb came last, dark circles under his eyes suggesting another sleepless night. Lily wasn't with him, probably still asleep at Mrs. Rios's house. He stood at the back, hesitating, until Alma gently pressed a coffee cup into his hands and steered him toward a pew. "Gather round," Reverend May called softly. The small group formed a circle around the altar, their shadows dancing on the walls. Grace found herself between Alma and Mrs. Chen. The blueprints before them showed familiar outlines: our homes, their street, their shared spaces marked in careful architectural lines. Someone had highlighted the structural issues Vale's inspector had flagged. "We've come to lay hands on these plans," Reverend May began, her voice warm in the quiet sanctuary. "Not just to pray over paper and ink, but to hold up the homes and lives they represent." Grace stared down at her hands, remembering the foundation board's cold email. Her power to help, all those resources, locked away with a few keystrokes. What good were empty hands? As if reading her thoughts, Alma reached over and squeezed her fingers. "Hands tied can still hold hands," she whispered. They joined hands around the altar, forming an unbroken circle. Rev. May led them in a quiet prayer, her words mixing with the first birdsong outside. "Lord, we lift up these homes, not just buildings, but vessels of memory and hope. Guide our hands and hearts as we work to preserve them. Show us the path when our own sight fails." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Next to her, Mrs. Chen was crying openly, her grip tight. They'd lived on this street for 40 years, raised 3 children in that little blue house. Now everything they'd built was balanced on a knife's edge. As the prayer ended, Alma spoke up. "We need to talk to Walter again. Show him what his choice really means." Grace nodded slowly. "I'll go. He's still weak from the hospital, but maybe." She trailed off, remembering his stubbornness, his dismissal of the forged notices. "Take him some food," Alma suggested. "Your mother's coffee cake recipe. I know you have it." Grace looked at her in surprise. "How did you—" "I remember your mama bringing that cake to every church social. Some things the heart doesn't forget." Alma smiled. "Maybe it'll remind him too." The group dispersed as dawn began painting the stained glass windows in soft colors. Grace headed home to bake, measuring ingredients with shaking hands. The recipe card was worn at the edges, her mother's handwriting faded but still clear. By mid-morning, she stood outside Walter's door with the still warm cake and a thermos of coffee. The morning was bright and cool, fall flowers nodding in the breeze. Such a contrast to yesterday's storms. It took 3 knocks before she heard shuffling footsteps. Walter opened the door looking frail in his robe and slippers. The hospital stay had aged him somehow, deepened the lines around his eyes. "Grace?" He blinked at her, then at the cake container. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe memory. "I brought breakfast," she said simply. "Can I come in?" He stepped back wordlessly to let her pass. The house smelled musty, unlived in. Walter had always kept to his bedroom and kitchen, leaving the rest of the rooms like shrines to the past. Grace's mother's paintings still hung on the walls, gathering dust. In the kitchen, she cut generous slices of cake while Walter made fresh coffee to replace what she'd brought. His hands trembled slightly as he worked the old percolator. They sat at the small kitchen table, morning light streaming through unwashed windows. Walter took a bite of cake and closed his eyes briefly. "Sarah's recipe," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Grace nodded. Alma remembered. Alma remembers everything. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then he set down his fork. "Why are you here, Grace?" Before she could answer, he raised a hand. "No, wait. First, there's something." He pushed back from the table with effort. "Help me get a box down. In my closet. Top shelf. Old tin thing, locked." Grace followed him to his bedroom. The closet was cluttered, but organized in her father's methodical way. On the highest shelf, behind a row of hat boxes, sat a dented tin lockbox. "Careful, it's heavy," Walter warned as she stretched to reach it. The box was indeed surprisingly weighty. Grace carried it to the bed, while Walter lowered himself carefully into his armchair by the window. "Your mother wanted you to have that," he said. "When the time was right. Maybe it is now." The tin box sat between them on Walter's faded bedspread. Grace watched as her father's trembling fingers worked the small key into the lock. Inside, carefully bundled papers filled the space, some yellow with age, others crisp and newer. "Your mother," Walter's voice caught. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Sarah kept everything, every deed, every letter, every change to the properties. She had a system." Grace lifted out the first bundle, tied with faded blue ribbon. The paper was thick, legal weight, with elaborate letterhead from the 1970s. As she unfolded it carefully, her eyes widened. "These are the original property deeds," she breathed. Walter nodded. "Sarah insisted on being part of every purchase. Wouldn't let me sign anything without reading every word herself. Used to drive me crazy." His voice softened on the last words, tinged with regret. Grace scanned the documents, her heart beginning to race. "Dad, have you read these recently?" "All of them?" He shook his head. "After she passed, I just couldn't. There's a clause here. In every deed." Grace's fingers traced the formal language. "A right of first refusal, if the properties are ever sold." She looked up at her father. "The tenants have first right to purchase if they're organized as a trust." Walter's face went slack with surprise. "What?" "Mom put it in every single one." "Look." Grace spread the deeds across the bed. "It's identical in all of them. The language is clear. Ms. Klein will confirm, but..." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Wait." Walter's voice was rough. He reached for one of the bundles, this one tied with black ribbon. "There's more you should see." Inside were dozens of letters, complaints from tenants over the years. Maintenance requests, reports of safety issues, concerns about rent increases. Many had Granite Door Management's dismissive responses attached. "I let them handle everything after Sarah died," Walter said quietly. "Didn't want to deal with it myself. Didn't want to face any of it without her." His hands clenched in his lap. "But I knew. I knew they weren't treating people right." Grace read through letter after letter. Many were from families still living on the block. Some were from Caleb, documenting issues in his unit, always polite but increasingly frustrated. "All this time," she murmured. "I was wrong." Walter's voice cracked. "About everything. The way I let them treat good people, the things I said about Caleb, what I almost let Vale do." He looked up at Grace, his eyes wet. "Your mother would be ashamed of me." "We can make it right," Grace said firmly. "But we need your help. We need you to sign an affidavit about Granite Door's practices." And we need you to affirm this right of first refusal clause. Walter straightened in his chair. Get me a pen. Grace called Ms. Klein while Walter wrote, his handwriting shaky but determined. The attorney's voice was sharp with excitement when Grace explained what they'd found. Get that affidavit to my office immediately, she ordered. I'll start drafting an emergency motion. The right of first refusal completely undermines Vale's position. Alma arrived within minutes of Grace's call, still in her church clothes. She read through Walter's statement, nodding in approval. This is good, she said. This is truth walking. She squeezed Walter's shoulder. Thank you for doing right. I'll take it to the courthouse, Walter said, struggling to stand. You need rest, Grace protested, but he shook his head. I need to do this myself, but... He looked between them. I could use a ride. Alma was already picking up her keys. I'll drive. And I'm calling reinforcements. By the time they reached the courthouse steps, a small army of senior citizens had assembled. Mrs. Chen, the Williams sisters, Mr. Rodriguez, AP, all dressed in their Sunday best, all carrying copies of their own letters and complaints about Granite Door. We're here to witness, Alma announced as she helped Walter from the car, to make sure every I gets dotted and every int gets crossed. Inside, Ms. Klein was waiting with a stack of motions already prepared. Her heels clicked efficiently on the marble floor as she led them to the clerk's office. File everything, she instructed the seniors. Every letter, every complaint. We're building a paper trail that can't be ignored. Walter signed additional statements as needed, his hand steadier now. The clerk's office hummed with activity as document after document was logged and stamped. Ms. Klein worked the phone simultaneously, her voice carrying through the office. Yes, Your Honor. The right of first refusal predates any agreement with Vale Properties, and given the evidence of systematic fraud by the management company. Yes, I understand. We can be ready in an hour. She covered the phone. Judge Watkins will hear our emergency motion to lift the vacate order. Walter, are you ready to testify? He nodded, straightening his collar. Past time, I spoke up. Grace watched as her father was sworn in, his voice clear despite his fatigue as he detailed years of mismanagement under Granite Door. He acknowledged his own culpability in ignoring complaints, then explained how the right of first refusal had been his late wife's non-negotiable condition for every property purchase. Sarah believed in people having a stake in their homes, he testified. In dignity, in doing things right. I forgot that somewhere along the way, but I'm remembering now. The judge listened carefully, reviewing the original deeds and the stack of documented complaints. Ms. Klein's arguments were precise and devastating, laying out how Vale's technical default and the subsequent vacate order were built on years of fraudulent practices. By early afternoon, Judge Watkins had seen enough. She issued an immediate stay on all eviction proceedings and ordered an investigation into Granite Door management. The right of first refusal appears valid and enforceable, she declared. Any sale must honor this covenant. Furthermore, given the evidence of systematic fraud, I'm ordering an independent audit of all property records and maintenance complaints. Outside the courthouse, Walter sagged with relief and exhaustion. Grace held his arm as Alma brought the car around. There's one more stop we need to make, he said as they helped him into the back seat. You need rest, Grace insisted. No, Walter's voice was firm. I need to apologize to Caleb first, face to face, man to man. Then I can rest. The morning sun had barely cleared the rooftops when the first pickup truck started rolling down the street. Dave Miller, retired Marine Corps sergeant, directed traffic from Caleb's front yard, his silver hair gleaming as he checked names off a clipboard. Team 1, Electrical and Plumbing. You're with me in Unit 4, he called out. Team 2, Structural Repairs. Mrs. Chen needs you next door. Let's move like we mean it, people. Veterans in work clothes streamed from their vehicles, carrying tool belts and supply boxes. They moved with practiced efficiency. Years of military precision now turned to neighborhood service. Behind them came a parade of church volunteers with coffee urns and boxes of donuts. Caleb stood on his porch, watching the activity with a mix of pride and lingering unease. The sight of so many people coming to help still made his shoulders tense, old habits of self-reliance dying hard. Alma appeared at his elbow with a steaming cup. "Here," she said, pressing it into his hands. "And this too." She held out an envelope. "What's this?" he asked, though he knew. "Your first stipend as CLT facilities lead." She fixed him with a stern look. "A fair wage for honest work." The committee approved it unanimously. Caleb stared at the envelope. "I don't need—" "Stop right there." Alma's voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't charity. This is partnership. You know every inch of these buildings. You've been fixing them for free for years. Now, we're doing things right, with dignity and fair pay for everyone." Before he could respond, Dave called from the yard. "Hart, need your expertise on this junction box." Caleb tucked the envelope in his pocket and grabbed his tool belt. For the next several hours, he moved from house to house, directing repairs and sharing his deep knowledge of the building's quirks. Each time he solved a problem or showed a better way to fix something, he stood a little straighter. By mid-morning, the street hummed with purposeful activity. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter set up a first aid station on her porch, while Reverend May's husband grilled hot dogs for the workers. Children darted between the adults, carrying water bottles and message updates. Lily had appointed herself official photographer, carefully documenting each repair with her mother's old digital camera. "For the court," she explained seriously, "so they can see we're fixing everything right." Inside the houses, improvements took shape rapidly. Licensed electricians updated ancient wiring while plumbers replaced corroded pipes. Everything was done to code, with proper permits rushed through by Ms. Klein's office. At the courthouse, a steady stream of neighbors filed through the clerk's office. They carried letters testifying to the community's commitment to maintaining the properties, personal stories of connection to their homes, and detailed plans for ongoing maintenance through the CLT. "We're not just fixing buildings," wrote Mrs. Williams, who'd lived on the block for 40 years. "We're preserving a community." Back on the street, Grace sat in her car, fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard. The resignation letter to her foundation board was simple and direct. "While I remain committed to ethical philanthropy, I cannot prioritize technical compliance over genuine human need. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from my position to pursue a more direct form of community service." She paused, watching through the windshield as Caleb demonstrated proper gutter installation to a group of veterans. His expertise was clear, his confidence growing with each interaction. This was what real change looked like, not just writing checks, but building true partnerships. By early afternoon, Dave Miller called for a final inspection walkthrough. The team leaders moved methodically from house to house, checking every repair against the city's requirements. They documented everything with photographs and detailed notes. "All electrical systems up to code," reported the master electrician. "Structural issues addressed and reinforced," confirmed the contractor. "Plumbing modernized and properly vented," added the plumbing inspector. Caleb followed them with his own checklist, adding notes about future maintenance needs and preventive measures. This wasn't just about passing today's inspection, AIT. It was about sustainable care for the long term. Ms. Klein arrived as they finished, her heels clicking purposefully on the sidewalk. She reviewed the documentation with quick efficiency. "This is excellent," she said, nodding as she flipped through photos and certificates. "The judge will have everything she needs to lift the vacate order." "You've done remarkable work." Caleb looked around at his neighbors, at the piles of replaced materials and fresh repairs, at Lily proudly showing her photos to anyone who would look. "We did it together," he said quietly. "The right way." Grace emerged from her car, holding her printed resignation letter. She watched as Lily ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Daddy, look!" She held up her camera. "I got pictures of everyone helping, just like you always help everyone else." Caleb hugged her close, his eyes suspiciously bright. Around them, volunteers were packing up tools, sharing last-minute advice, patting backs, and shaking hands. The street had transformed, not just physically, but in spirit. Dave Miller approached Caleb with an outstretched hand. "Good working with you, facilities lead," he said with a grin. "You've got my number if you need backup on future projects." "Thanks," Caleb replied, gripping the older man's hand firmly, "for everything." As the work crews began to disperse, Ms. Klein gathered her files. "I'll file these certifications immediately," she said. "The judge should lift the order by end of day." Grace watched her drive away, then looked down at her resignation letter. The choice felt right as the sight of neighbors working together, as right as Caleb finally accepting his role as a leader rather than just a helper. Alma appeared beside her, glancing at the letter in her hands. "Sure about that?" Grace nodded. "Some things matter more than money or position. Like doing things the right way?" Alma agreed, echoing Caleb's words. Together they watched as the last of the work crews departed, leaving behind a street transformed not just by repairs, but by the power of community in action. The marble halls of the courthouse echoed with footsteps as Ms. Klein strode toward Courtroom C, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Behind her walked Grace, Caleb, and a group of determined neighbors. Derek Vale and his lawyers waited outside the courtroom, their expensive suits a stark contrast to the work clothes many residents still wore from the morning's repairs. Vale's smile was professionally bland. "Quite the crowd for a simple property matter." "Nothing simple about people's homes," Alma replied, adjusting her church hat. Inside, the courtroom's wood paneling gleamed under fluorescent lights. Judge Maria Ramirez, known for her no-nonsense approach, studied the last-minute filings as everyone settled into place. "Your Honor," Ms. Klein began, her voice clear and steady, "we're here regarding the emergency vacate order on the Maple Street properties. We have new evidence that fundamentally changes the situation." She approached the bench with a thick folder. "First, this affidavit from Walter Delaney, the property owner, confirming a right of first refusal clause in the original deeds. This clause specifically grants organized tenants priority in any property sale." Vale's attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, these documents are decades old. They're not relevant to current code violations. They're entirely relevant to property rights." Judge Ramirez corrected, studying the papers. "Please continue, Ms. Klein." Ms. Klein nodded. "Second, we have complete documentation of repairs addressing every cited violation." She presented the morning's inspection reports, photos, and certification letters. "Licensed professionals have verified all work meets or exceeds code requirements." The judge reviewed the photos carefully. "These repairs were completed when?" "This morning, Your Honor." The community mobilized significant resources to ensure proper compliance. Vale's attorney interjected again. "This rushed work can't possibly. I'm looking at signed certifications from licensed inspectors." Judge Ramirez cut him off. "Unless you're questioning their professional credentials?" The attorney subsided. Ms. Klein continued. "Finally, we have letters from over 300 community members detailing their commitment to maintaining these properties through the Community Land Trust structure." She gestured to the thick stack of envelopes. "These residents aren't just fighting eviction, they're creating a sustainable model for neighborhood preservation." Judge Ramirez spent several minutes reading selected letters. The courtroom remained silent, except for the soft rustle of paper. Caleb watched her face, trying to read her expression. Beside him, Lily clutched her camera with its documentation of the morning's work. Vale rose to speak. "Your Honor, this is an emotional appeal masking serious issues. These properties require millions in upgrades to meet modern standards. The current owners lack resources for proper maintenance. Our development plan, your development plan, Judge Ramirez interrupted, appears to rely on displacing long-term residents through questionable tactics. She held up a document. This report shows systematic misapplication of payments by Granite Door Management. Mr. Vale, did you conduct due diligence before purchasing the mortgage note? Vale shifted uncomfortably. We relied on the management company's records that are now subject to investigation. The judge set down her papers and looked around the courtroom. Her gaze lingered on the residents, many still dusty from repair work. I've reviewed everything presented today. The right of first refusal clause is valid and binding. The Community Land Trust has legal standing as an organized tenant body. All cited violations have been professionally addressed. She picked up her gavel. I hereby lift the emergency vacate order and direct the district attorney to investigate Granite Door Management's practices. The gavel cracked down. Lily squeezed her father's hand. Alma whispered a quiet, "Thank you, Lord." Vale and his attorneys gathered their papers and left quickly. Outside the courtroom, Ms. Klein shook hands with the residents. The CLT has clear legal standing now. Vale can't force the sale while you have right of first refusal. Grace stepped away from the group, finding a quiet corner to make a call. Yes, this is Grace Delaney. I'm submitting my formal resignation from the foundation board, effective immediately. She paused, listening. No, my mind is made up. The letter is already in your inbox. She ended the call and opened her banking app. Without the foundation restrictions, she could finally access her personal funds. The transfer to the escrow account took just a few taps. Back in the courthouse lobby, Caleb was speaking with the group. Ms. Klein says we'll need regular inspections and maintenance reports. We can set up a schedule. His phone buzzed. So did Grace's, Alma's, and several others. The bank notification appeared on their screens. Escrow funding confirmed. Account ready for disbursement. Grace looked up to find Caleb watching her. She gave a small nod. No fanfare, no public announcement. Alma go or, just quiet confirmation that the pieces were falling into place. Alma gathered everyone close. Time to head home, she said. We've got work yet to do, but today we remember that justice still stands. They walked out into the afternoon sun, a community that had faced the worst and found its strength. The courthouse steps had seen many victories and defeats, but today they carried people who had learned that ownership meant more than money. It meant standing together, working together, believing together. The bank's message blinked on their phones, a digital confirmation of facts they'd proven in sweat and solidarity. They weren't just residents anymore. They were stewards of their own future, one house, one repair, one victory at a time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the credit union's brick facade as neighbors gathered in the parking lot. Folding chairs appeared as if by magic, courtesy of Alma's trunk, which seemed to hold an endless supply. The autumn air carried the scent of coffee from thermoses and fresh muffins wrapped in napkins. Caleb stood near the entrance, his work boots recently cleaned, but his hands still bearing traces of yesterday's repairs. Lily sat on the curb nearby, her joy jar, now empty but somehow still full of promise, cradled in her lap. She'd tied a bright ribbon around its neck for the occasion. Grace arrived with Ms. Klein, both carrying thick folders of documents. The attorney's usual professional demeanor couldn't quite hide her smile. Everything's in order, she assured the gathered residents, just waiting for the bank to open. At precisely 9 a.m. Mr. Chen, the credit union manager, unlocked the doors and ushered them into the conference room. The space was too small for everyone, so they rotated in shifts, neighbors chatting in the lobby while the core team handled the paperwork. Just as Ms. Klein began reviewing the final documents, the door burst open. Derek Vale strode in, flanked by two men in expensive suits. I'm prepared to offer 20% above market value, Vale announced, pulling out a cashier's check with a flourish. That's significantly more than the land trust's offer. Mr. Chen looked uncomfortable, but Ms. Klein simply smiled. Mr. Vale, you received notice of the right of first refusal clause. The CLT's offer has been accepted by Mr. Delaney. Your bid, regardless of amount, cannot override their legal right to purchase. That clause is decades old, Vale protested. Surely. The judge upheld its validity yesterday, Ms. Klein interrupted firmly. Unless you'd like another court appearance? Vale's polished facade cracked slightly. He looked around the room, seeing determined faces where he'd expected to find uncertainty. With a tight nod, he turned and left, his footsteps sharp against the tile floor. Walter Delaney, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, watched Vale leave. He stood slowly, using his cane for support, and made his way to where Caleb was standing. "Mr. Hart?" Walter said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I owe you an apology, a public one." He straightened his shoulders. "I made assumptions about you, about a lot of people. I let those assumptions guide my actions instead of looking at the truth right in front of me." Caleb's expression remained careful, but he turned to face Walter fully. "You paid your rent," Walter continued. "You maintained your home. You showed more care for these properties than I did in recent years. And when things got hard, you didn't just fight for yourself, you helped build something to protect everyone." He extended his hand. "I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry." For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Caleb stepped forward and took Walter's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means something." The tension broke as Mr. Chen called them back to the documents. Grace initiated the wire transfer while Ms. Klein reviewed the final signatures. At 10:47 a.m., the credit union system chimed softly. "Transfer complete, Mr. Chen announced. "Congratulations to the Maple Street Community Land Trust." A cheer went up from the lobby where the others waited. Alma started humming "Blessed Assurance," and soon others joined in, the impromptu hymn filling the space with joy. As they filed out into the late morning sun, neighbors hugged and shook hands. Someone had set up card tables on the credit union's lawn, and more food appeared: casseroles, salads, thermoses of soup. It was too early for lunch by most standards, but no one seemed to care. By late afternoon, the celebration had moved to Maple Street itself. Tables lined the sidewalks, covered with potluck dishes and punch bowls. Children played hopscotch on freshly chalked squares, while teenagers helped hang strings of lights between porch posts. Near the corner, where the street sign marked their newly secured home, something new took shape. Veterans who'd helped with repairs now worked with younger neighbors, assembling a sturdy structure from preserved wood. Its design was simple but beautiful: a freestanding pantry with glass doors, a slanted roof, and space for both food and household necessities. Lily watched the construction with bright eyes. When they attached the sign, "Little Free Pantry, take what you need, give what you can," she tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we put the joy jar there? Not to keep, just to show people?" Caleb looked at his daughter's earnest face. "I think that's perfect, sweetheart." They walked over together. One of the veterans had built a small shelf inside, just the right size for the jar. Lily placed it carefully, the ribbon catching the evening light. "Maybe," she said thoughtfully, "people can leave notes about good things that happen, like we did, and when they're having a hard day, they can read them while they get what they need." Grace, who had been helping stock the shelves, paused to listen. "That's a wonderful idea, Lily. Would you like to write the first new note?" Lily nodded solemnly. She pulled a small notepad from her pocket. She'd taken to carrying one just like Grace did, and carefully wrote her message. Everyone pretended not to watch as she folded it and slipped it into the jar. The sun was setting when Reverend May called everyone together. Neighbors formed a loose circle around the pantry, holding hands or linking arms. The pastor's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Today we celebrate more than property changing hands," she said. "We celebrate hands joining together, hearts opening wider." The reminder that love is not just a feeling, it's work boots and legal papers, casseroles and repair tools, hymns and hope, and yes, even little jars of joy. She gestured to the pantry. This stands as our promise to each other. To share what we have. To help where we can. To remember that ownership means stewardship of buildings, yes, but more importantly, of community. Alma's voice lifted in, "Great is thy faithfulness," and others joined in, the harmony swelling in the golden light. Children swayed to the music while elderly neighbors dabbed at eyes. Even those who didn't know all the words hummed along, caught in the moment's gentle power. As the final notes faded, someone switched on the string lights. They twinkled against the deepening dusk, matching the growing number of porch lights clicking on up and down the street. Neighbors began serving dinner on paper plates, passing dishes back and forth across tables. Later, when Grace walked past the pantry, she paused to read Lily's note through the glass door. In careful children's handwriting it said simply, "We stayed." 2 weeks had passed since the Community Land Trust took ownership of Maple Street. The late summer evening wrapped the neighborhood in golden light as screen doors creaked and neighbors called greetings across freshly mowed lawns. Caleb adjusted his tool belt, checking items off his clipboard as he finished his afternoon rounds. The position of CLT facilities lead felt right, not charity but honest work that used his skills to serve the community. He'd spent the morning replacing worn weather stripping on Mrs. Peterson's windows while Walter supervised from a lawn chair, offering decades of maintenance wisdom between sips of lemonade. "Remember to check the seal on both sides," Walter had called out, his voice stronger now that he was following his doctor's orders. These old frames can be tricky. Their unlikely partnership had surprised everyone, perhaps themselves most of all. Walter's knowledge of the home's quirks complemented Caleb's hands-on expertise. They developed a rhythm, trading stories and techniques as they worked their way through the CLT's improvement list. Inside the church office, Alma sat at a folding table, surrounded by papers, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she organized the monthly blessing schedule. She'd created a system of rotating volunteers to stock the little free pantry and tend to newcomers' needs. The calendar on the wall was filled with potlucks, workdays, and prayer meetings, the heartbeat of their renewed community. "Caleb," she called as he passed, "don't forget the inspection reports for Unit 4, and take some of these muffins home to Lily, Rev." May emerged from her study, carrying a box of donated supplies for the pantry. Her steady presence had helped smooth the transition, offering both practical support and spiritual guidance. She'd turned the monthly blessings into joyful celebrations, weaving together prayer and fellowship with planning for the future. "The Downtown Ministerial Alliance is interested in our model," she told Caleb, smiling. "Grace's presentation last week really opened some eyes." Grace had found her own path forward after resigning from the foundation. Her new Quiet Neighbor Fund operated with minimal paperwork and maximum impact, providing seed money to help other neighborhoods follow Maple Street's example. She worked from a small desk in the church office, preferring to stay close to the community she'd helped save. Outside, children played hopscotch on the sidewalk near the little free pantry. The structure had become a neighborhood hub, its shelves regularly filled and emptied as people gave what they could and took what they needed. Lily's joy jar sat in its special spot, now accompanied by a notebook where visitors could share their own moments of gratitude. As the sun began to set, porch lights winked on one by one, a tradition that had taken on new meaning. Each light represented a home preserved, a family able to stay, a small victory over displacement. The warm glow turned Maple Street into a gentle gallery of hope. Lily sat on her front steps, carefully writing in her notebook. She'd started a new joy jar after donating her original one to the pantry, and she took her role as neighborhood joy keeper seriously. Her father watched from the sidewalk, his heart full at the sight of her contentment. Grace appeared from around the corner, carrying a pie from the bakery where she'd become a regular customer. "I thought we could use a celebration," she said, holding up the pie. "Small victories count too." "Speaking of victories," Walter called from his porch next door, using his cane to help himself up. "Mind if I join you? Bring those stories about the radiator systems with you," Caleb replied, grinning. "I've got a stubborn one in Unit 7 that could use your expertise." They gathered on Caleb's front steps, passing paper plates and plastic forks as Grace served the pie. Lily perched on the railing, legs swinging as she watched the fireflies begin their evening dance. "What's today's joy note?" Grace asked her, taking a bite of pie. Lily held up her notebook proudly. "We stayed," she read aloud. "And we helped others stay too." Walter nodded slowly, his expression softening. "You know, my late wife would have loved this. She always said these homes were meant for families, not profit." "Speaking of which," Caleb said, "the repairs on the Anderson place are almost done. Another family can move in next month." Grace smiled. "The Quiet Neighbor Fund just approved matching funds for a CLT startup in River Heights. They're using our blueprint." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Walter mused, accepting another piece of pie. "Sometimes through foundations and legal papers. And sometimes through joy jars and pie," Alma finished, joining them with a thermos of coffee. Rev. May followed with a stack of cups, settling onto the bottom step. The street hummed with evening activity, children calling goodbye as they headed home for dinner, screen doors closing softly, the distant sound of a choir practicing in the church basement. Peace settled over Maple Street like a comfortable blanket, wrapping around its residents with the familiar warmth of home. Lily slipped her latest note into her joy jar, the paper crinkling against the glass. The porch lights cast their steady glow, each one a reminder of the battle they'd won together. On the steps, Caleb shared the last piece of pie with Grace, while Walter launched into another story about the winter he'd replaced every furnace filter on the block. The evening wrapped around them, soft and secure, as neighbors waved from their porches and children chased fireflies across carefully tended lawns. Here, in this moment, they had everything they'd fought to save, not just houses, but a true community, bound together by struggle and triumph, casseroles and courage, prayers and perseverance. If you enjoyed the story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.